Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm extremely excited for season number 4 of this podcast. One of the best aspects of it that I was not expecting when I started it years ago was how much I would learn from my guests and how many people would reach out to me on how it's moved them. Thank you for listening. And as the title suggests, I remain grateful for your time and attention. I've been encouraged by a significant person in my life to give listeners a peek behind the curtain. So very quickly and briefly, over the past several months, there have been several highlights and down times. I was the officiant at my sister's wedding in October. I lost my golden retriever and one of my best friends named Gia to cancer last month. But in that same breath, my foundation, Meaningful Growth Foundation, built around the hardships cancer patients face and the help they may need, will be hosting our first annual golf outing this May. For more information, go to my website. Earlier this year, I spoke on the USA Lacrosse Mental Health Panel to discuss the ongoing misconceptions around mental health. I moved to Florida, and I've spoken to teams and organizations nationwide about sports psychology, peak performance, and my philosophy on training. So looking ahead, I'm excited for what's on the horizon in 2023. I feel a great sense of humility for the roster of highly decorated guests coming on. So without further ado, let's get started. As always, I'm the host, Mark Lucini, and on this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and explain the strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode number 45. My guest, Joe Walters, a fellow Nike lacrosse athlete, coach, former Major League Lacrosse teammate, and one of the best to ever play this sport. Joe's list of accolades is overwhelming and inspiring. NCAA Attackman of the Year during his time at University of Maryland, 4-time All-American, 5-time professional champion, 11-time Major League Lacrosse All-Star, and former member of Team USA, both outdoor and indoor lacrosse. Joe runs a company called JW1 Lacrosse, with the mission of teaching individuals, small groups, and larger camps how to attain their fullest potential through the sport he loves and knows so well. As a teammate turned opponent and now friend, I've been able to witness Joe's work ethic, attention to detail, competitive nature blended with a team-first mentality, playmaking ability as a player, and capacity to inspire as a coach, mentor, and friend to many. True champion and leader through and through. I look forward to learning more about Joe's perspectives on performance, his philosophy on development, and most importantly, his story. Joe, thanks for carving out the time.
Hell yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So in preparing for this conversation, you expressed this statement to me. The gift of influence on someone is special. I agree. And I want to start it out where it started for you. Could you start with your earliest influences in your life growing up in Rochester, New York?
Yeah, I have to just say my dad. You know, I grew up in Rochester, and my dad he brought me to every practice, stayed for every practice. To kind of learn the sport. It started with basketball. I got into wrestling, and that's what brought me to lacrosse. So one of my buddies that I wrestled with, and I was in like second, third grade, so I was like a young kid. He asked me what I was doing for the spring, and I didn't know what lacrosse was, so he just invited me out. Our parents talked, and that's how I got into lacrosse. And it was just that's where it all started. But my dad's definitely my biggest influence. I think as I got older, he really taught me about sacrifice, dedication, and setting goals and working hard to attain those goals.
I'll tell you one thing that resonates with me right away is I remember my first lacrosse catch with my father, and he had a baseball mitt. So I know kind of the hurdles they go through to be there for us. And one of the things that I wanted to dive right into was other sports that you played, and you brought up basketball and wrestling. I would just continue on the thread of your earliest chapters and say, really early on, what were those separating factors for you, right, in terms of your performance here, way before Maryland, maybe as, beyond second grade, but in middle school and high school? What do you think you would point to? Was it the sacrifice and dedication, or what else?
I think it's got to go just the sacrifice, dedication. Any sport that I played, whether it be basketball, I moved on from wrestling once I got into lacrosse. But basketball and lacrosse mainly, I was in love with both sports. I am in love with both sports. So it wasn't, it's practice because, it's hard work, but it's like, I want to be outside. I want to be, shooting hoops. I want to be on the net, getting shots off. I want to be playing catch all the time. And I
Mm.
think, that's what I attribute, success at that age, and even through college, even in the pros. It's being in love with the sport, and it's putting in that time that a lot of guys aren't willing to do.
Right. I think there's like a famous story about Mia Hamm at University of North Carolina. And one thing Anson Dorrance points out is her love for the ball. And that's what he looks for in his athletes. Like, would you still be playing with it if we didn't have practice? And I think the story that comes to mind is I was a rookie, right, when we were on the Bayhawks together. And I still remember, there was something about you, man. I don't know what it was. You always got shots up after it, no matter what. Right. And I think obviously that started at a very young age. But I guess one of the questions I want to ask you in extension to your father, right? What about lacrosse specifically? Who were your earliest influences in teaching you the game and really creating you as a player?
Yeah, my first coach was Scott Bryson. He's up in Pittsburgh, New York. He was my first youth coach, but I look at guys like the Powell brothers. I idolized Casey, Ryan Powell. That was mainly through middle school and through high school, but my earliest heroes are the Gate brothers. They I was able to go to some clinics that they did in Rochester, and it's like these guys were like God. So to be able to see them in the flesh, and they're big towering guys, and it's like, man, I just it just made you fall in love with the sport more. But day to day, man, it was my dad. It was my dad because it wasn't on TV. Lacrosse wasn't on TV. It wasn't streamed. We didn't have that. So um, I went to, my dad brought me to every Syracuse lacrosse home game. And that was pivotal in learning the sport, because I really believe in, if you want to be a great player, you have to practice, you have to play a lot, but you have to watch a lot too. You have to watch a lot of lacrosse or whatever sport you're playing, to see what guys are doing right, see what guys are doing wrong, and copy what they're doing.
Grateful and Full of Greatness was too long of a name for me to put on Twitter, so I made it Study Greatness, and that's kind of how I push it out on Twitter. Because if you want to be happy, study happiness. If you want to be successful, study success. And I think that has a lot to do with the mental side of the game, right? There's always these instructional and physical things that you can do from a conditioning standpoint, but success leaves clues. One thing I learned really recently, actually, from listening in on a webinar about alcohol and addiction, were things that lead to lasting performance enhancement and what doesn't. So the things that don't lead to lasting performance enhancement are big goals alone without an action plan, information alone, and then motivation. That was really surprising to me. Everybody goes, oh, you should be motivated. You should be motivated. And you touched upon one of the things that actually leads to lasting behavioral change, which is role models, right? So if you don't have role models, right, you're going to be in trouble. So you brought up the Gate brothers, you brought up your dad, you brought up the Powells, and then the other two things are standards and then an action plan. Like I said, that big goals alone without an action plan don't work. But I really like how you point to the role models. It's why I start these podcasts always with the same thing, like, who were your earliest influences, right? Because you didn't do it alone, right? You don't read obituaries about somebody who's a born orthopedic surgeon, right? They learn about this over time, right? So one of the biggest things that I study in sports psychology is career transition and transition in general. It's very hard because you create such an identity around things, and then you got to move on to a different thing. I'm not necessarily talking about you going from player to coach. I want to still stay in the realm of you as a player. I want to talk about that middle school to high school and then getting into Maryland by the end of your answer, if you don't mind. Could you tell me about that evolution or that area, right? Either physically or psychologically, or what was that era of your life like?
Yeah, I think talking about, I just touched on Syracuse. I like was the biggest Syracuse fan. Like, if I always talk about it, that they never recruited me, and back then Syracuse really never recruited west of Syracuse. It was like Syracuse, Long Island, Maryland, and it just wasn't a thing. So, but I always thought about, if they would have sent me any letter and said, hey, like, we think you're okay at lacrosse. You want to come try out? I would have been there no matter what it was. So, but going to those games, man, like, and back then I think it was 22 straight Final Fours, and obviously a bunch of championships in there, but Syracuse went to 22 straight Final Fours. So, and the Final Four was an event that my dad and my friends went to every year up until high school, because once you got into high school, you played during the spring break. We played into May. So, but like, going to those games during the season, seeing them at the biggest stage, right? Because the Final
Mm.
Four, I don't know if it still is, but it's still kind of the pinnacle of lacrosse, the Final Four. Um, but seeing them at the biggest stage, like, those experiences really, really kind of made me strive to be great, to want to be at that level. Um, so when I was in middle school, by that point, I was already, probably the best kid on the team. I played midfield, so I could play attack and defense, play all over the field. And then when I got to high school, I went to Irondequoit High School. I was a freshman on varsity. It was only two of us, freshman on varsity, and I was playing man up. I wasn't starting, but I was playing man up, and I'd get some runs, every game. But I was a small freshman, so I was really small. I was I think a 13-year-old freshman. I'm super young for my grade, so I didn't start growing until my sophomore year, sophomore summer is when I hit a growth spurt. But it was just, again, like, it wasn't that I had a hard time with not playing a lot as a freshman. I think I was just pumped to be on varsity and be a part of that. But wanting to be at that next level and want to play. And when I got to my sophomore year, I think statistically that might have been my best season as a sophomore,
Mm.
because I was just ready to go, ready to play.
I'll tell you, first on the Syracuse front, last year was the first time I was introduced to Gary Gate, and then this year I'm working with Syracuse Women's Lacrosse as their mental coach, and it's been really exciting to see that. And I bring it up for this reason: the environment of excellence that you were talking about, right? You brought up the 22 years in a row sort of thing, and that's something that I'm really encouraging on an individual level when working one-on-one with somebody or small group. It's like, what does your environment look like at home? Is it excellent, right? So that do you have easy choices, right? Are your workout things available, right? Is water available? Is it a bright room? It's all these different things of setting it up so it's easy to be excellent. If that easier, to be excellent, to work hard through that. And then one of the questions I actually had prepared before we even talked was to an extremely talented student athlete that may be listening to this conversation. What piece of advice would you give to him or her, because they already are attaining that like all conference or all state or all American status, right? So it's really hard to stay with it. Maybe something happened between your sophomore, junior, and senior, because you probably had a chip on your shoulder from freshman to sophomore year. What advice would you give to that student athlete that has already experienced some success but still has to stay on a track for a long-term excellence?
It's a really good question. And I take it back to kind of high school and even college. I think that our goals individually are different than as a team, right? So I always wanted to be great individually, but the reason why you play is to win, right? So what can I do individually to help this team win? And it doesn't always work out. There's only one winning team a season, so everyone has, I'm sure, similar goals, but ultimately one team is going to win it all. So, but I think that's kind of it. At Maryland specifically, as a freshman, I was All American, but I was ACC Rookie of the Year and starter. I think I led the team in points maybe, but losing in the Final Four, losing to Virginia, like that wasn't it. So it's like next year, what can we do better? What can I do better to help us get back, to help us win that big game? And again, like I at Maryland we went to three Final Fours, never won the big one, but I think that's what drove me. Um, in high school, my freshman year, I talked about that. We lost to Pittsburgh in the sectionals, and they were undefeated. We lost, I think it was in overtime. So like that drove me for the next year. And it's like, as a sophomore, we lost to Victor in the championship. And it's like, that was a team that we should have beat. So it's like that drove me the next year. My junior year, we won sectionals. Like we finally won it. Um, And then senior year, I think we lost in the finals again to Fairport. But it's like, I think it's the team goals that really drove me. You know, it's individually when you're attaining success, that's great. You know, I always believe, and I try to tell players this, you know, it's always think about what you can do to help the team. What can you do individually to help the team? If you're a guy that isn't a skilled player, but you are a hustler, you are a vacuum on the ground, you can get ground balls, then do that the best you possibly can, right? Just do your job. If you're a goalie, make the saves you have to make. Get the ball out, make good outlet passes. Like just do your job. Don't try to do too much, right? Goalies they don't want to come out of the cage and put the team at risk. Like just do your job. You know, if you're a goal scorer, then your job is to score goals, right? And you need to stay after and shoot. So it's those messages I try to get across, and those are things that really help me.
You know, right from the start, you know, staying in one thread, psychology, and then bringing it back to the story. There's a guy named John Piaget, brilliant guy who talks about the developmental psychology of individuals. And he said, we live inside of a game whether we want to or not. And in order to be invited to the most amount of games, you have to understand the art of competition and cooperation. Right. So you can't just always, you know, never pass the ball, compete. But you also can't be, you know, whatever everybody needs, you know, whatever that's too cooperative. Right. So it's this yin and yang. And I love how you brought up the individual and the team. Coach Baxter, my defensive coordinator when I was at Yale, always used to say this line. It was like at the top of every scouting report was the play you want to make is always secondary to the play the Bulldog defense needs you to make. And that really goes down to what you said from a real clarity standpoint. And then the last thought I want to bring up is there's this article, it's a New York Times article called The Zen of Weightlifting. It could really be called The Zen of Lacrosse. It could be called The Zen of whatever your craft is, right? And it really came down to three things. And that was the weight room was a place where you have autonomy. It's just you to work on yourself. A place of mastery, so progressive overload and get better. Same with lacrosse. And then the third one, which you ended your answer with, was belonging. Right. And that's that team goal. Right. And if you just think that you're in a silo, right, there's no such thing as a successful hermit crab sort of idea, then you're not going to be successful. It's that belonging to something bigger than you. And I'm sorry to go here, Joe, but you brought up the losses against Victor and all that. But I really want to go into the biggest hardships and setbacks because I think that those created you. You know, listeners can really resonate. You know, there's no such thing as a great story without a great problem. So what would you point to as some of your biggest hardships or setbacks, you know, whether it was high school, Maryland, or beyond?
You know, one in particular, you know, it's not something I'm proud of, obviously, but before my junior year in high school, and this is after we lost my sophomore year, right? So we're coming off of a loss against Victor, and that's when we moved from Class A, which is like the big schools, to Class B, like the classification adjusted a little bit. So we're in Class B, and that's a team we should beat. So we crapped the bed there, and then going into my junior year, it's a big year, especially individually for recruiting. It's your big year, big high school season before you can really get recruited. And I got suspended from school the week before the season started, and that was like, big setback. And my parents, my dad really came down on me, and out of school suspension, just not something I'm proud of. So that was tough, especially with all the things on the line. But it really, it's almost a blessing because it made me focus on what I had to do and get my shit together. So it really set the tone though for the season, and that, all right, like that's over with. Now it's time to work. Now I need to prove to everyone at school. Now I need to prove to everyone that I've let down, that it was a big mistake, and I'm accepting this challenge of bouncing back here. And that's what I had a good season, but obviously we won sectionals. So that's a big setback.
I appreciate your vulnerability, man. I appreciate your vulnerability because I think, in the moment, it's it's a problem and something that could be cause frustration, but in the long term, it causes fascination because you're probably a better coach. You probably could speak to those in high school better, right? Because you've been there, right? And that's what this is all about. And I appreciate you opening up about that, because I think those type of things make you more channeled, right? Something that's really obvious in psychology is pain is leverage. And usually people that are lukewarm in terms of pain, it's like, they're not going to change, it's like, it kind of hurts, whatever, but you really have that out of school suspension, right? What a metaphorical thing in your life for, let me get back into school. Let me get back into the team. Let me get it back into the hearts and minds of those people that maybe have thought different about me. So staying on this thread, but a little less harsh, strengths and weaknesses, something that I'm often talking about is, your strengths and your weaknesses are the same. So your strengths uncontrolled would lead to your weakness. For example, somebody who's extremely extroverted talks over other people, but they're also really great communicators, just as an example. But over the course of your career, lacrosse wise, what would you say came more naturally to you? And what did you really have to work on as a player?
Ooh, what came naturally to me? I think what came naturally to me is just my work ethic. Just knowing, if you ask anyone when I went in high school, you ask anyone in high school, you ask anyone at Maryland, and they will, without a doubt, tell you that I was the hardest worker, right, on the team. You would, Chris Pasavia, like just wrote on one of my posts recently, made a comment about like, I can remember Joe in college, like, shooting on his own hours after practice, like randomly, even days when we didn't have practice, he was out there shooting. It's like that was me. And I try to get that through to players every day.
How do you do that? How do you get that
every single day? I try and tell them, like, it's not that there's this misconception that, oh, I'm going to go to my team's practice. And there's kids, especially where we live now, right? Especially where I live now, where kids play on 3-4 different teams. They're playing basketball, they're playing lacrosse, they're playing, whatever it is, soccer, and whatever sport they want to be great at. But let's say they had 5 practices a week of all their sports. It's like, well, I get it. You're busy, right? Like that's a lot. 5 practices. I mean, it isn't. It's an hour and a half each day, but I get you're busy, but like, please don't think that going to your team's practice is enough. It's not. It's not even close. The touches that you get at lacrosse practice with your team are like minuscule compared to what you need every day. You're not going to be a great shooter or feeder, passer, or defender, or whatever it is, by getting 15 shots at your team's practice. That's not going to do it. So you need to spend time on your own. It doesn't have to be with me. Like, that's what I do. I train, so it doesn't have to be with me. I don't. It's not that I'm looking for that, but it's like, if you want to be great, and that's something that you need to decide. If you want to be great at it, then this is what you have to do. You got to put time in on your own. It's not good enough just for team to go to team practice. That's a fact.
Well, I'll tell you, this isn't a serious issue that's going on just in terms of being approached. I'm sure you get it as well. Coach, I'm lacking confidence, right? And it really comes from, right, I say it this way: when you're at your team practice, your coach is doing everything he or she can to get you ready for that upcoming opponent from a strategy perspective, which has nothing to do with your individual improvement, right? You already brought it up from the team versus individual thing. So I think one of the most fascinating things about talking to guys like you and women that are peak performers as well is that there's these prerequisites. Yeah, cool, right? Prerequisites. But then there's these principles and details that all these peak performers do that like really make the difference. And that's really why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because it dovetails right into my next question for you, right? As a coach now, what messages do you find yourself repeating the most? You already shared one of them, which is, it's not enough to just go to practice and expect the results. But as a coach, right, you're going and doing these clinics, you're doing these larger group things, right? When you're speaking, right, and looking to pass on your knowledge of the game and otherwise, what message are you most often repeating?
Yeah, I mean, the one that I just talked about, that's the one, the main one. Putting in the effort, outside of your team's practice. That's got to be the fundamental principle that you need to understand, right? And every time I train kids, there's two rules. There's two things that I have for them that I need out of them. Number one is 100% physical effort. If you come and if you're training on your own and you're walking through stuff, you're going half speed. Well, when it comes time to game time, you got to go full speed. You're not going to be used to doing it full speed. You're going to make mistakes because you're not used to shooting on the run, sprinting away from a defenseman, right? You're not going to be accurate shooting in a corner if you shoot the ball 75%, right? So you need to shoot it hard every time you shoot and get in the habit of training your body to go through that shooting motion as fast as you can, as explosive as you can every single time while being accurate. That's how you become a great shooter. So all of that, 100% physical effort's number one. Number two is the one that's even harder, right? 100% mental effort. This is the tricky one, right? So every time I correct a mistake, every time I teach something, it can't go in one ear and out the other. You've got to be willing. You have to be willing to listen, really process what I'm saying, and then do it. I can't tell you how many times, I go over, let's say, shooting mechanics and, kids making a mistake, their butt end's way out here, it's flared out and the balls sound that way. And it's like, well, you just got to straighten your stick out, get your hands back more, follow through the right way, get the path to stick the right way. And they don't listen. They just do the same thing over and over and over. You got to have that mental effort to like really listen, understand it, right? If you have a question, ask, but like really try and listen to what I'm saying and then do it. Even if it feels super weird, right? It's going to feel weird. If you're doing it the right way, if you're doing it a way that's not something you're used to doing, it's probably a good thing, right? If we're correcting a mistake, it's a good thing. So you got to be willing to, let it feel uncomfortable and then it'll get comfortable.
I love it. Bringing up Piaget again about the developmental side. He had this thing, exploration, assimilation, accommodation, which exploration was seek, right? The assimilation is understanding, and then the accommodation is really, really getting it for using layman's terms. But there's 4 stages of learning in anything, and I'll use the big terms first, and then I'll break it down. But it's unconscious incompetence, not knowing what you don't know. Right. It's like learning lacrosse for the very first time, and then conscious incompetence. Oh, that's lacrosse. I know I don't know how to do that. And then a good coach will take you to the third level, which is conscious competence, right? I know how to do it. And for the listeners that are just listening, Joe was moving his hands and showing motions about how to get better, right? That's just like I have to think and then I do it. I have to think and then I do it, right? You just released a video the other day I watched you of the quick release, right? If you have to think, that's not going to help you in those big moments. And the last one is unconscious competence, which is, Tiger Woods over a golf ball, Serena Williams over a tennis ball, these sort of things where it's just reps. Joe Walters hitting a corner sort of idea. And the layman's terms in that, right, for all that conscious incompetence talk is ignorance, right? You just don't know. Then awareness, which is, I kind of gathered that's what you were saying with the listening side of things. Right now you're aware of what you must do. The next is change. And the fourth is mastery, right? So you start to change, right? And then you start to master that, right? So which takes us to a beautiful part of this conversation, Joe, is I don't want to talk about game time. I want to talk about the pressure moments. I want to go inside the pressure moments. So like you were exceptional in those moments, right? From high school to college and beyond, right? I've seen the videos, right? The times it's almost like you crave those moments. Wayne Gretzky talks about that a lot. When the pressure was turned up, when the heat was turned up, he remembers going back to his 9-year-old self and being in the backyard. So when you reflect over those highest pressure moments in your playing career, how were you able to thrive?
Ooh, I think it's important I played some, huge games, some big games, and it's, there's no doubt about it. The night before, the day of, you have those butterflies. You feel that anxiousness. That man, like that. This is it. This is what you play for. I think it's important to remember this. Is no matter the level, whether it's rec lacrosse, high school, college, pro, there's only going to be 2 outcomes, right? One team's going to win, one team's going to lose. That's it. Okay, it's not going to go either way. It's not something different. Someone's going to be successful and someone isn't. And everyone has the same goals. They want to be the winning team. So I just think it's important to realize that. And I think that takes some of the pressure off. There's 2 outcomes. That's the only thing that's going to happen, man. Like, at the end of the day, like it's not going to be You know, we're out here to do a job. We're out here to win. Um, and all of the work that you've put in your entire life is on display. You know,
Mm.
everything's on display. Everything you prepared for. It's time to showcase it. But at the end of the day, like it's going to go two ways. And just do your job, right? Be willing to be willing to fail. Be willing to fail. You know, I think like
Mm.
some guys in those moments, I've been on teams where guys that are good players that they don't want the ball. Like they've physically said, like, you take it. I don't want it. It's like, all right, like that's great for me. Like I want the ball, but you know, you gotta be willing to fail. Because if you're not willing
Mm.
to fail, there's no way you're gonna succeed, right? There's no way you're gonna hit a big shot if you're not willing to take it. You know, so I think it's important just to remember that. You know, remember that there's only gonna be two outcomes. Be willing to fail. Just understand that. But man, all the effort that you put in, it's that's what you play for. And I think that's what has helped me get through those big moments. And one in particular, I think back to when I was playing with the Nighthawks. We were playing for our third straight championship, three-peat. No professional team has ever done that. That's something that I'm like super, super proud of. Like out of all the things that I've done in my lacrosse life, you know, I'm probably most proud of that. Um, and there's reasons because I struggled at box. I wasn't a good box player. It took me a lot of time. It took me a lot of effort to get to a place where I was seeing success, seeing the benefits.
Why did you struggle? What would you say is the reason you struggled?
You know, there's some guys that, you know, as offensive players and even defensive players that play, that are field guys that play in the NLL. I mean, you know, it's a different game. Like even though you know how to fundamentally play defense, you know how to play a pick and roll, these guys that you're going up against, they've been doing it their entire life, and they know like the little angles and how to like, you know, hit your hip so that you can't turn. You know what I mean? Like they know things that we don't know. So, but for an offensive player, you know, I struggle with. And there's guys that pick up box super easy. Guys like Drew Westervelt, Brendan Mundorf, Casey Powell. Even though Casey played a little bit in Canada, so he had a little bit more experience. But there's guys that just pick up box as an offensive player easier than others. I was a guy that it took time. I did not pick it up, and for me, it was a struggle shooting. It was a struggle with the two-man game. Those are the two main things. So it took me, my coach, Mike Hazen, who's still the coach of the Nighthawks, he invited me up to play for Brampton in Senior A up in Canada after my third season of being a healthy scratch a lot, just not being good. He asked me like, do you want to play? Like, do you want to do this? Or do you want to quit? Like there's only two ways you're going to go here. You're either going to make the effort or, you know, you're probably going to get cut next year. And you know, I was never a quitter. And I said, yeah, man, I'll play. Like you let me know where to be, I'll be there. And my dad, you know, talk about my dad all the time, but my dad was the guy that not every game, but he came up and we would drive 3 hours up with me. I would play a game, drive 3 hours home. And I did that was all summer long while I played for the Hamilton Nationals. And it's like, you know, first off, I gained a huge respect for guys like Brody Merrill, guys, indoor players that played MLL and were playing Senior A. Man, I had heard stories like how that went, like guys playing 4 games during the week and then playing our game on the weekend. It's like, oh wow, like you know, it sounds hard, but I had no idea what that commitment really looked like. So that just made me tougher. Like that experience just made me a tougher player. And you know, I talked about this the other day. Coach Alberici for Army for West Point. I don't know if you know him at all or have heard him talk at all, but
Got into his camp since I was a little guy.
unbelievable speech that I heard him give a group of high school players. They talked about toughness, and you
Mm.
know, when we think about toughness, you think about like a guy's tough, a guy can stand in the ring and take a punch. Those are things we think about, like hard hitting. But toughness, he talked about like is guys at West Point that you know have to get up at 4 in the morning, you know, have to get up and make their bed and go to class. You know, when most of us at Maryland, I'm sleeping until 10. You know what I mean? Like things like that. Those are tough. Those are tough guys, right? Making that ultimate sacrifice for your country, like that's tough. So for me, I gained a level of toughness, not in the fact that like I was playing with, playing up against guys that had wooden sticks. Like, yeah, that made me tougher as a player. Like now, like a normal cross check and field doesn't bother me, but driving the 3 hours, getting the shit kicked out of me for 2.5, right? In a 100-degree bar, like indoor arena on concrete, and then driving 3 hours home, and then doing it the next day, like that's tough. That's tough, and so that's where I gained a completely different um, outlook, a completely different view of indoor lacrosse, and the commitment that these guys in the NLL had made their entire life. So when kids that I work with that 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 get a little upset when they have to train on grass instead of field turf, like that is wild to me when I think about kids in Canada and Ontario playing on concrete floors in 100-degree heat. That's tough, and I think that's you see Canadian lacrosse, and it's on par now. I think they've won the world championships. Like they're in some ways better than American players. Like there's that levelness now, and I attribute, obviously there's a lot to that, but they're a different kind of player, and I gain a lot of respect and a completely different view of what it takes to play indoor from those experiences that summer. Those I did two summers in a row.
Well, I'll tell you what, you gave us so much there, and I'm going to do my best to pull out the main things. And I first want to go back to what you said about wanting the ball under pressure, right? In the weight room, it's progressive overload. Whatever muscle you rep out over time will get stronger. And when it comes to the mental side and the brain side, the neurological side, it's neuroplasticity. So the malleable nature of the brain. And one of the coolest things that I've come to understand is that you have a better chance, and it's almost like you increase the likelihood of it happening when you want to learn something. So that goes all the way back to you saying with your players, the 100% mental focus, right? And their willingness to listen. I want to change that word though, Joe. It's not willingness, it's eagerness. An eagerness to listen, right? A bulging eye, sort of thing. What else does Joe have to teach me? Because this is going to matter when I'm out on the field. And then going to what you talked about with toughness, what's his name, who wrote the book, Can't Hurt Me, David Goggins, decides to call discipline perform without purpose. And I like that, right? Because it's this idea of making promises to yourself and keeping them and doing things regardless of how you feel, right? Obviously, it's important to have those friends and loved ones that you can talk to and vent to and get things off your chest when you're not doing well emotionally and all that. And it's really important to understand that if you really want to be great, you can't be doing it just when you feel like doing it. It doesn't matter. Your feelings and emotions lie to you all the time. They're not legitimate a lot of the time, right? You have to have that time where you're talking about it with people that you love and trust. And then toughness. I guess that what it leads me to is the consistency over time, right? You can't be tough just one time. Like you brought up with the Army story, 4 a.m. every morning, not just every once in a while, like every morning, doing it all the time. Something that you said that really resonated with me, because it's really important to talk about, is you've been a healthy scratch, right? That doesn't come up in your bio, right? You being the attackman of the year and all this, that doesn't come up, right? But you being a healthy scratch, handling that, right? Working through that, committing to that. This Nighthawks three-peat, there's a wall there. There's a wall there, and you have to lean through and get through that somehow. So I guess where I would go to in the term of toughness is I do think there's a longevity aspect to it, right? You have to do and sustain that type of discipline for years. And you've done that, right? You've played at this game, not for 2 or 3 years, right? For many in the teens, right? You know the answer, right? 16, 17, 18, something like this. When you think about how long you were able to perform at such a high level, right? Work ethic got you through the door, right? What kept you there?
Wanting to win. That's I talk about that a lot, but every single year, and one of my one of my favorite teammates I ever had, and you've had him too, is Brody Merrill. I've had a chance to win 2 championships with Brody Merrill, and I've also been on the losing side with Brody Merrill, and he's a guy that I know he shares the same the same goal, the same why. I know he just wants to win. I know that that's what fuels why he's playing to this day. He wants to. I'm sure he wants to win an NLL championship, something that he hasn't done before. I'm sure that's driving him. It has to be.
Has to be.
Has to be. And I remember winning with him, and then I remember in 2000, I want to say it was 2013, we lost together against the Bayhawks, and it was in Philadelphia. And I remember looking at him, and I remember him being like really disappointed, and I was like so hurt by that. Like it just really bothered me that he was so hurt. And not only do I think that that's what makes teams like tight, that was a team that we played together for a bunch of years together, like 5, 6 years. The Rochester Rattlers, and then on to the Hamilton Nationals, Toronto Nationals. But winning is just something that's what really lit my fire every single year. And I think if you don't have that goal, like you're kind of in it for the wrong reasons. And I don't know what else, in my opinion, I don't know what else there is to do something competitively for if you're not in it to win. And once and I was talking about this, but any season that ends in anything that isn't a win, isn't a championship, is a letdown. It's a disappointment. Because you've spent the time, you've put the workouts in all year. You've spent time shooting, you've spent time watching film, you've done all that. If you don't have anything to show for it, there's no moral victories, right? Like it's not like, oh, we started 0-5 and we came back and we were 500 team. Like that's, who cares? Like you didn't win. Like it's not it. So that's what drove me for all those years. And and I talk about this, once you taste what that feels like, once you know what it feels like to win, that's why you want it again. That's why you play to win, because there's no better feeling. There is no better feeling. What it feels like. Once you have that excitement, that there's nothing better. You need it. You need it again. And every guy that, every teammate that I've had that hasn't won, I want them to win. Like I want you to feel that. I want you to understand what that feels like, and that'll help. It helps them get it. But that's why I play, man. That's why I played for so long, because I just want to win.
It's so good, Joe. And one of the things that comes to mind is, a few answers ago, you said you have to be willing to fail, right? And now you're saying you want to win. And so this willing to fail, wanting to win sort of idea. And what resonates with me is that imagery that came to mind when you said, seeing Brody disappointed, right? I would say in a lot of ways, Joe, that was a win, though. The fact that you were able to connect with a person in a locker room that deeply, that's a win, man. That is a huge win. I just finished reading this book called The Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman. And he said, usually purpose is derived by one of four things: trauma, destiny, altruism, doing something for others, or self-expression. And I really do believe peak performance is self-expression at its highest level, right? Because, you're an attackman. I'm a short defensive midfielder, right? Blaze is a goalie, right? Everybody's just expressing themselves through their craft. And I would argue to say that as I've gotten older inside of lacrosse, winning came in many different forms, but you're absolutely right on the jubilation that comes from raising the trophy, and that gives you that insatiable appetite to come back. But so did the loss, right? So did the losing of a championship really makes you come back too. It's the same thing that drove you in high school, right? That getting out suspended, right? That sort of failure. It's like, no, there's an edge here, and we're going to do something about it. So I want to ask you a two-part question that has a lot to do, because I'm very conscious of your time and I have so many more to ask you, is what are, and perhaps you already answered the first part, but what are the biggest lessons you've taken with yourself as a player into being a better coach? And then I want you to elaborate on JW1 Lacrosse and its mission, its vision, and how that experience has been for you.
So what have I learned as a player to help me as a coach?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on it, but just as a player, I've just learned so much about what works and what doesn't work. I think what works is just you have to just be willing to put the effort in. I just know that that's the recipe of success. It just is. If you look at any elite athlete, if you look at Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Allen Iverson, you look at any sport, right? The best of the best. There's no secret. There isn't like a magical potion that you drink. You have to you have to just be fully engulfed in your sport. You have to be. And it's something that it is hard to relay that and like tell kids, like if you're, and especially we live in an age now, right, where kids are just glued to their phones and they're playing video games. But it's hard to tell parents and kids like you need to do more, like stop doing this, do this. Sometimes it's tough to do that, but I try and get that through. You just instead of you'll be surprised how many kids that I work with that I ask them if they watched some of the college games and they're like, no, they played. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing on the weekend? Like, I get that you probably had a game, but all of these games, we live in an amazing era where every game is streamed and every game you can just watch on demand. And, you need to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just watching a game. Like, even if you can't get on the field, which, spend some time in your backyard with your stick work, but that's fine. Let's say it was raining like crazy yesterday. Awesome. Watch a game. And it's like
Mm.
those are things that I did, right? Like, and there wasn't games on TV, but man, I went to every Syracuse game. I went to Nazareth College games. I went to RIT lacrosse games. And it's like, you need to do that. You need to
Mm.
watch. Um, you know, Playing basketball, man, like I was in, and I treated basketball just as I treated lacrosse. When it was basketball season, first off, I didn't play a fall sport. During the fall, I did basketball workouts all fall, so that when it got to basketball season in the winter, I was ready to go. Right. So I treated fall as my off season for basketball, but it was like in season because I was fully involved with basketball. And it's like every single night, my dad would get out of work. He was a doctor. He would get out of work, pick me up from my mom's restaurant or wherever I was at home, and we would go to the YMCA. Go to the YMCA, and I would either play pickup with dudes that were in high school. And this is when I was like in sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. I would play pickup with the inner city high school kids. I'd do that for a while, and then I would play. I would play. I'm sorry. I would shoot hoops with my dad, and we would have to make 300 free throws, 200 3-pointers every night, and that was non-negotiable. That was just it before we left. And I'm not saying that that's like I have a buddy Tyler Ralph who's he's an NBA skills trainer, and he played at McQuaid High School. He played Division I basketball. Like, he was Mr. Basketball of New York State. And it's like, I'm not saying that that's like the right workout to do, but that's what we did. You know what I mean? That's what me and my dad did. That's what, working on my ball handling, that's what we knew. But that's just what it takes. There's no, it takes what it takes. I don't know who said that quote. I don't know if that's a famous one, but
It's a
I've
great
seen that
book.
recently.
Great book. Trevor Moab. It takes what it takes.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most highly recommended books I give. Is it
Uh,
takes what it takes.
I'm gonna read that book, man. But like, that's
You have to.
it's absolutely it. It just takes what it takes. There's no way around it. So that's the main message. Like, I know as a player, like that's what I did, and I try and relay that and just show kids that.
I'll tell you, staying on the front of the NBA skills coach, that's very cool that you brought up Tyler. I heard in a passing, I was just studying a little bit, and I found this guy, Drew Hanlon, who's an NBA skills coach. I think last year or the year before, he had 3 of the top 5 point scores in the league, right? Joel Embiid being one of them, Tatum from the Celtics being another, one of the Washington Wizards, whether it was Bradley
Deal.
Beal, yeah.
Yeah.
And you're gonna love this quote: "A skill is not truly acquired until it holds up under pressure." That's
Mm.
Drew Hanlon's, right? And that has a lot to do with what you're saying about hitting the corner, 100% physically, 100% mentally. A skill is not truly acquired until it holds up under pressure. And that, yeah, I love the diction you use, Joe. Fully engulfed in your sport, right? Well, what a powerful way of looking at things. So here's a kind of a question that I'm not even sure it's true. I wanted to ask you, when your mind is away from the game, how do you invest your free time? Or is it, do you find yourself pretty much fully engulfed in your sport for most of the time?
It's a blessing, right? Like I talked about it. I'm truly lucky. I'm truly fortunate and blessed to be able to, now that my playing career is done, to just give on all the knowledge, give on all the experiences, and work with kids to help them reach their goal. Back when I was growing up, I didn't have that. I don't know if, lacrosse obviously has grown like crazy since then. Since 95, right? That's when I was that's when I was a little guy. So like since like mid '90s, late '90s, the game is completely different. But I didn't have a pro player, ex-pro player to work with. I had my dad, and I had camps to go to. I went to Nazareth camp every year. I went to like RIT camp, Princeton camp, but like I went to lacrosse camps growing up. But yeah, man, like you know, I think just those experiences, like that's just what I'm trying to give back. Just everything that I've been fortunate enough to do in this lacrosse life. It's given me everything. It's taken me around the world. It's taken me all over the country. And it's just so yeah, I am fully invested in lacrosse. And to a fault sometimes, to a fault. My girlfriend and I, I'm sure there are many days where it's like, you have to go train really like you need to have your own time too. And she's absolutely right. And it's tough. It is tough. It's tough to have a work-life balance when you not only love what you do, but people depend on you too. People are depending on you to work with their kids and to work with them. So it's difficult, but that's what I'm struggling with, and it's something that I'm definitely working on personally. But when it's not lacrosse, when it's not working, it's traveling. We love to travel. We got two great dogs, so we've found a lot of joy just bringing them to different parks, to bring them to beaches, and just watching them run around. And you're a dog guy, so you get it. But it's those are things that we love to do. So moving over to the other side of the bay, we're going to be in Millbrae Burlingame. Right, it's like 15 minutes right on the beach, right on the Pacific Ocean. So it'll be nice to get over there. A lot of hiking. Yeah, so that's but yeah, traveling around. I think over Easter break, spring break coming up, we're gonna make our way up to Oregon. Gonna meet with Mike and just get
Nice.
on campus and see Nike, show Adrian Nike. I've been there once before, but just get up there. We've been meeting to take a little trip, but it'll be a nice time to get up there.
Yeah, Mike Fisher, Nike Lacrosse, excellent guy. I'm really grateful
Yeah.
for him. I'll tell you as we wrap up here. One of the small questions I want to ask you: what's your favorite location on the planet that you ever been? You have a favorite place that you point to?
Oh man, I mean, we used to live in paradise. We used to live in Manhattan Beach, California. So like that's absolutely. I mean, we were fortunate to live there. We lived there through COVID, which was kind of a weird time. But Manhattan Beach is a special place. I think we hope to one day maybe make it back down there eventually. But another place that Adrian's family has a place there, but Naples, Florida is a really, really beautiful
Amazing,
place too. Yeah.
amazing. So I last one or two questions. One would be where can listeners find you? Where should they go to listen more, find out what you're doing and about your work?
Yeah. So on Instagram and Twitter at JWalters1, JWalters1. My website, JW1Lacrosse.com. I've got my camps up there. You can contact me on that webpage. But the Dream Big Lacrosse Camp, that's coming up. We've got 9 camps this summer, boys and girls. We got 5 boys, 4 girls. So big summer lineup coming up. But yeah, get in touch on social media at JWalters1.
Outstanding. Is there a question you wish I asked but I didn't?
No, man, I think this was a really insightful, podcast, man. I learned a lot myself from you talking, so I really appreciate being on here. I appreciate all the things that you said. This is great, man. think you hit everything on the head, man.
Well, I appreciate our relationship, Joe. I know it's going to continue to flourish from here on out. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.